All right, Hannah Nokes, thank you so much for joining me today on LinkedIn Live. I appreciate it.
Hi, Alan. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Excellent. So, how does it? First question I have for you: when I was writing your introduction, part of the introduction now says "and author
Mm.
Hannah Nokes." How does it feel to be an author?
It feels pretty good. It's going to feel even better next week when I get to hold a copy of the book in my hand. I just heard from the printer that they're printing them and putting them together right now. So I can't wait to see that baby in real life.
That's so awesome. Yeah, I have a couple other friends that have written books, and just the unpacking of the box and
Mhm.
seeing it for the first time is just that's got to
And
be such a cool
surreal.
feeling.
Yeah, we've been getting some reviews from advanced reader copies already, and gosh, people like it. So that's just awesome. I was the only one of the only ones who had read it, my co-author and I. So just really excited to see the impact that I hope that it will make.
Oh, it's definitely going to make an impact. And I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad that you're here today. So let me do a quick introduction of you. So you are co-founder with Maggie of
Mhm.
Magnify Impact,
Yes.
and also co-author with Maggie of Magnify Your Impact, Powering Profit with Purpose,
Yes.
which is the book that comes out on September 21st.
Correct.
So I'll provide a link to everyone in the commentary when this is all fully completed and posted on LinkedIn. Everyone will have the link to how to, number one, access the book so that they can pre-order it there, and also be able to find you and Maggie online. Maggie Miller. I haven't mentioned her last name yet, but Maggie Miller. And she is traveling right now. Otherwise, she would probably have joined us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. She sends her regards.
Right on. So you and I originally met when you were, I think, director of community affairs, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken, at Easy Corp,
Yes.
which I thought was interesting as I was looking back over our timeline of knowing each other.
Mhm.
Um, what you do for a living, certainly a company like Easy Corp, which I don't know if you want to share anything about them, but they could certainly, from an industry perspective, likely use someone like yourself and spread the message of, hey, we also do a lot of really great stuff in the universe,
Yeah.
kind of company.
Yeah, so my background is mostly in corporate business development and marketing roles over the years. And when I came to Easy Corp, I was there for 5 years. I built their community engagement and corporate social responsibility function. And through that process, it's a financial services company. And through that process, I just fell in love with the discipline and the kind of philosophy around how companies can use their resources to make an impact in the world, but in a way that drives value back to the business. And so that particular company, they're a retail financial services company. And so it was about how do we get more foot traffic in our stores and loyalty with customers, and also help with employee engagement and retention through social impact, through saying our brand stands for something. We are here to make an impact in this world, and here's how we can do that with our skills, our products, our services. And so I really just kind of fell in love with that whole concept, and took every course I could take on the subject, read every article I could read, and just decided to go out on my own and see if I could help more companies create a strategic approach to how they wanted to give back to the world. And
That's
then ended
awesome.
up meeting Maggie, and we merged our business together, and we're now called Magnify Impact. And we've been able to help lots of business leaders create strategies for their social impact and drive value back to the business.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I mean, you didn't say it right there, but I've seen you. I've heard you say it, and I've read it several times. But basically, you help companies and business leaders turn love into action.
Mm.
So take that social impact, and I mean, did you ever envision that this would become your work or your life's mission? Basically, helping companies do that.
Oh my goodness, I don't think so. I mean, throughout my career, um, just kind of rose through the ranks in marketing and business development. Was always very interested in international business development. Did a stint working for a nonprofit and fundraising for 5 years. And I think what was consistent through all of those different roles was just, what I talked about earlier, like using the resources of a company for good, or helping to mobilize people or focus energy around how you can make a difference wherever you are. I love the concept of where, in my faith tradition, like where God has strategically placed you in the marketplace, or what talents or skills or gifts you have to bring to the table. And so I kind of came up with this phrase for myself, turning love into action, because for me, it speaks to that relationships are the most important thing, whether you're in a company environment or in your community or in your family, wherever you've strategically been placed. And when you love those around you and work together to put um, that love into action, that's really how you not only deepen relationships, but how you make change.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Yeah. And I'm really curious. I mean, you do, again, you mentioned this in the book, but how have you seen, so, Easy Corp was what year again that you had this kind of epiphany that this is what you wanted to do?
Oh, probably around like 2007.
Okay. So 2007, no thought on the horizon. None of us knew what was coming in 2020.
Yeah.
How has 2020, how has the pandemic specifically changed people's perception of their social impact in the world through business?
Oh, I think it's been revolutionary because we've seen business leaders and even people who work inside companies have to look beyond themselves at how to help others around them. And I think people have really learned that sometimes it's the simple things, and it's the kinds of things that you already have available to you easily. It's not necessarily writing the huge checks. And so I think that really ties in with how we coach business leaders, as we say, whatever is your competitive advantage already, whatever you use to make profit today, those are the things that often, when channeled appropriately, can make the biggest impact in the lives around you. And so I think that that's really come through the pandemic, and we've just seen so many amazing examples of business leaders putting love into action to help the people who work in their organizations and beyond, and using what they already have. Whether it's using the vodka stills to make hand sanitizer, or the sewing machines to make masks. That has been really, really cool to see, and I think it has really underscored for us this concept of what we call superpowers. So, what resources, skills, expertise do you already have, and how can you put those in play?
Yeah. No, I love the concept of superpowers because, it's just it's such a relatable concept, I guess, and kind of what you do as a normal course of business. But I am curious because you've talked so much in the book and just now about the business leaders coming to you and the business leaders saying, this
Mhm.
is what we do, this is what we want to do.
Right.
Have you found a shift, or even in 2007 when you first embarked on this, does it also kind of bubble up from the employees? I mean, is it coming from the employees saying, hey, look, as an organization, look at what 3M is doing, or look at what Wegmans is doing, or look at these other companies, can we also do that? And
Yeah.
I guess the part B of that question, how do employees do that with their leaders in a way that is not either condescending or too aggressive, I guess?
Right. Yeah. No, it's really interesting. We often see that the move towards social impact happens inside organizations in two ways. Um, Typically, very often, there's a purpose-driven or altruistic leader at the top of the company who has an interest in using the company's resources for good. And even more often, I'd say it's a groundswell. So you've got employees who they're connected in their local communities and their kids' schools. They're seeing other employees who might need support, and they're coming to the leadership and saying, what can we do? How can we help? Can we volunteer here? Can we contribute to this cause? And so we see it often come from both directions, but very often those organizations, that kind of activity feels very scattered and reactive. And so what we like to do is try to take a step back and say, okay, let's look first at the organization's superpowers. Let's look at who your stakeholders are, and the kinds of challenges in the world that it makes the most sense for this company to address, and focus the majority of our efforts there, and allow for employees to continue doing what they're doing, which is to love each other and love their community as well. So we look at it as a portfolio approach. Generally, we find that companies don't need to be spending more money in the community. They're usually doing a pretty good job with the investment that they're making. They just need to get more focused about it, more focused, more effective, less scattergun, less reactive.
Yeah.
So, but you definitely have to allow room for both, for the employees to carry out what they're passionate about as well.
Right. Now, what about the challenge of, so we want to stand on this. We want to stand on, this is the love that we've turned in action.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a fear, I would say, of marketing that too much, of like standing out there, too far and saying, look what we do, look what we do.
Yeah.
How do you coach companies on avoiding that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things at play there, I think, in what you described. One is, if you take it to one extreme, it's this concept of CEO activism, or sort of brand activism, which is we're going to make a really vocal stand for something that we see is important, and that can sometimes be risky or feel risky and needs to be managed well. The other side of it is taking credit for what you're already doing in the community, and not credit for credit's sake, but credit for the opportunity to bring others along with you. So we talk a lot in the book about bringing others along on the journey, that all of the value inside a corporation comes from those relationships. Back to the relationships thing again, right? So if your customers love you, they'll talk about you. And that's where new business comes from. If your employees are loyal to you, they'll stay with you, and you'll retain your great talent, or even encourage new talent to come your way. So you don't want to be silent about the good that you're doing in the world. Companies, I think, and several of the business leaders we've worked with have had a fear of stepping out there too far, or bragging about what they're doing. But I think that it's really important to take a leadership position in this and say, it is important to contribute to your community. It is important to bring your customers and employees on this journey, as long as it's backed by legitimate action.
Yeah.
So that's where the authenticity piece comes in, right? So everything that I just said, is the big caveat is it's got to be real, because employees and customers will sniff out immediately if it's not real. So I think it's great to lean forward and speak about what you're doing publicly. You should do that, but it's just got to be backed with real action.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a reluctance, at least in my experience and the leaders that I've known and talked to, there's a reluctance to really pontificate too much about the good that they're doing. But there's also this fine balance of, but we can't really keep it a secret, because, to your point, which I definitely want to talk about a little bit more, you can attract talent, you can engage talent, you can retain talent, which right now is the hardest thing in the world to do.
Yeah.
By talking about it.
Yeah, and that's exacerbated by the younger generations. The millennial and Gen Z generations have strong expectations that the company that they work for or do business with is really putting themselves out there to solve some of the world's most challenging problems. And so, as a brand, if you're not paying attention to that with that consumer base and that emerging workforce, which is the majority workforce now, then
Right.
you're absolutely missing out on the boat in terms of attracting and retaining that talent.
Yeah.
Have you seen?
So in the book, you and Maggie talk about the blueprint.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about the blueprint so people can understand just kind of how it works and how you walk into a company and help them understand what it would look like?
Yeah, we developed the concept of the blueprint as just a really simple, easy to visualize way to help companies create that more strategic approach to their social impact. So we have been for years doing strategy sessions with business leaders, and we found that thematically we were talking with them about the purpose and values of the organization are kind of the core of everything, really getting crystal clear on what you stand for as a business, what you want the legacy of your company to be, and what are the behaviors, the values that guide your behaviors inside the organization. So that's the first piece of the blueprint, is what we call core ideology, purpose, and values. And then we look with company leaders at, what is your core competency? What is the product or service or skills or knowledge or expertise or financial resources that you have to offer the world? As I said before, the very thing that makes you win in the marketplace is often the same thing that you can use to make a big impact in the world or to solve challenging problems that you see around you. So that's the second piece of the blueprint. We call it superpowers. What's your superpower? And then the third piece is, where have you been strategically placed? Where is your unique sphere of influence? Who are the people that surround you? Who are the people that make your business a business?
Right.
Which is your customers and your employees first and foremost. And then it differs for every organization, but it could include local governments, maybe nonprofit partners, suppliers. It just depends on the makeup of your organization. And then what's the priority for those relationships? So every single one of those relationships is very important, but at some certain points in time, one might have priority over the other. So, for example, if you're in a high growth mode as a company and you need talent, that might be your priority right now, is how you communicate that your employment brand for future talent, for example.
Right.
Or maybe regulators are breathing down your neck, and that's your priority, or you're having supply chain issues, which lots of companies are having right now. That might be your priority. So that's stakeholders. And then the fourth piece of the blueprint we call impact pillars, and that is, what problems, challenges, needs do you see in the community around you that you care most about and you're most uniquely positioned to do something about? So, where can you bring those superpowers to play? How can you bring those stakeholders along with you to really solve something in the community? And you can't do everything, right? So,
Right.
a lot of companies try to solve it all, or they just sort of react to requests that they get and they write checks. But what we have found is that if you narrow it in and you choose 1 to maybe 3 areas of focus, you can get so much more accomplished, and the impact of the effect on your brand is so much more beneficial.
Nice.
And then once you've decided what you're going to focus on, then you identify the right partners to move forward with to make that actually happen. Most companies don't need to be creating their own nonprofit. Because especially here in Austin, Texas, we've got plenty.
Exactly. There's enough.
So who can you align yourself with that's already doing great work in that area and can help you accomplish your goals?
Right.
So so that's the blueprint. Core ideology, which is purpose and values, superpowers, then identifying your stakeholders, and finally selecting some impact pillars.
Love it. Yeah, and you guys do such a wonderful job in the book. I love it when authors give tangible examples, and like you guys just gave great companies, that are household names on really both sides of the fence, because you talked, in one section that you and I talked about called eras of impact,
Right.
eras of impact. You mentioned a few companies, and on both sides of the fence, you mentioned Texas Mutual Insurance,
Mm-hmm.
which people outside of Austin or people outside of Texas may not know of.
Right.
And in the same breath, or in the same section, you talked about Nike
Right.
and the eras of impact, or I guess basically the shared value, I think
Yeah.
was what you were going for there. But how Texas Mutual Insurance really has a shared value concept, and Nike really needed to adopt one when
Yes.
they had something blow up. Can you share a little bit about both of those stories, and just kind of how you unpack those in the?
Sure, yeah. So the eras concept was really just a way to categorize some of the historical changes that have happened over the years that have moved us to where we are today in terms of companies' role in solving problems in society. And so we talk about how, early on it was all about philanthropy and just companies making big contributions to sort of solve some of the things that they saw around them, which is wonderful and still absolutely exists today and is an important component of any social impact program. And then we talk about sort of the era of responsibility, where basically, if you're a manufacturer and you're dumping chemicals into the ocean, that suddenly became something that was paid attention to, and there were regulations and sort of social pressures to stop that. Um, so the example of Texas Mutual, they're a client of ours. They are the largest provider of workers' compensation insurance in the state of Texas. And when we started to work with them, they were very philanthropic. They talk about putting love into action. I mean, they love their customers. They love their employees. They would tear up in our focus groups talking about how their job was to get Texas workers home safe to their families every single night. And so just the heart was just there. But what they needed help with was really focusing in their superpowers, which were understanding, how to protect Texas workers and how to promote Texas business, and how to use that in a more focused and effective way to advance the relationships across the state of Texas. And so,
But all their employees bought in. I mean, it wasn't an employee issue. Every employee knew getting Texas workers home safely was the mission, right?
yes, absolutely. And that's why that core ideology, that purpose and values is so critical. And it is the foundation to the blueprint. Because if, everybody doesn't have to tear up when they talk about your product. I mean,
But it helps.
it helps. It's a unique example, but everyone should have some sense of why do they work for this organization, and if your company were to go away, what hole would that leave in the world? And the corollary to that is 100 years from now, when we're all gone, what do you want people to remember about you, about your company, about your brand? So that's a really important component of that, and that was a great foundation to start with Texas Mutual. The Nike example was about they had some issues with child labor, and took them a while to come around to understanding that the public perception of that was actually worth paying attention to, and they needed to make some pretty significant shifts in the operations of their business. And so, it wasn't to knock Nike as much as to say that societal pressures and expectations have changed, and people are paying attention. And, obviously those kinds of things are considered just not done anymore.
Right.
You should always constantly be looking at the ramifications of your operations, and how you can endeavor to make a positive footprint on the world more than a negative footprint.
Yeah, and I love the quote. I mean, I've seen the quote before from Warren Buffett that said it can take you 50 years to build a great reputation and 5 minutes to lose it all.
Well, and I
And
would say with Twitter, 10
oh
seconds.
yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. It's
Mhm.
absolutely amazing. But yeah, just knowing, you know, what happened to Nike, and I remember that happening. I remember the conversations about it. But you look at the brand today, and it's like they definitely had a pretty crack team of people being able to socialize the reversal
Yeah.
of that challenge.
Yeah. And I think, it's a good point about social technology because people now have the opportunity to support brands that align with their values and then really publicly shame
Yeah,
brands that don't align with their values, and so that's really risky for brands in terms of not living up to their customers' expectations. But I would, and we don't want business leaders to feel just nervous and scared and paralyzed to do anything because they don't want to make a wrong step. I think what is really important there is, again, back to the concept of authenticity,
yeah,
that whatever you say you stand for, show up and actually show some action to back it up.
right.
Walk the talk.
Walk the talk. You have a whole section on walk the talk.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's. I mean, and you mentioned in that section uh, Jim Fish with waste management,
Yeah.
and I think it was in that section anyway, or at least that's what I recall.
Mm-hmm.
But at the beginning of the pandemic, he came out to 45,000 employees and said, None of you are going to get let go. None of you are going to get laid off. None of you are going to get furloughed."
Right.
And he walked the talk.
Yeah, and they have the value of people matter, and I'm not sure if that was exactly how it's worded, but people, I think it's people matter. And so, and they talk about that on a daily basis as a critical value for the way they operate. And so that was a direct manifestation of that value in terms of being authentic and walking that talk.
Right. So, and this wasn't a question that I had necessarily planned on asking, but I need to ask it. We're talking about waste management. We're talking about Wegmans. We're talking about, in the book, you've talked about Aflac, which, is in the next section.
Mhm.
Um, Nike, Texas Mutual, which is a huge company. What about the little guys? What about the smaller companies? I mean, I know you advise smaller companies. You and I have talked about you advising us even, but what about those companies that don't have necessarily the assets or the clout to do
I would
grand
say,
scale?
yeah, I mean, I would say generally it's exactly the same. So, I mean, I think that that's the beauty of using your superpowers, which are not necessarily your checkbook,
Yep.
to make a difference. That the the scale of the ability of resources really is inconsequential. It's about what do you already offer, and how can you apply that to solving a challenge around you. So, um, I think that smaller companies often have a really big opportunity because they're nimble. They may not be able to, attend charity galas or, give big grants to nonprofits and those kinds of things, but you can go out physically and do the work. We just interviewed John Paul DeJoria, if you know, founder of John Paul Mitchell Systems and Patron Tequila, for our upcoming podcast. And we asked him that question, when you were small, when you didn't have any money, because he started the business with $700, which is incredible. How did you make an impact in the world? Because that's always been really an important value for him. And he said, when we didn't have the money, we just volunteered ourselves. We used ourselves. Like we were out planting the trees. We were visiting with people that needed a friend. And um, over time, you can grow into doing things that cost more, but use what you have, and what you have may literally just be you.
Yep.
And it may be your lunch hour, and it may be mentoring a kid, but use what you have. Don't worry about what everybody else is doing. Do what you can do in the area where you've strategically been placed.
Right. Yeah. So true. So true. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. So, tell us more about the podcast. So, I didn't know that you had the podcast. Is Magnify Impact, I
Yeah,
assume?
it's a podcast with Forbes Books Radio,
Okay.
and we'll be launching here in about the next month. And we've just got a selection of really incredible guests that represent, different areas of business and life. We've got our favorite author and mentor, Bob Goff, who's just an incredible leadership inspirer, if you will, has really pushed us to try new things and be bold in
Nice.
how you can put love into action. And he does all kinds of crazy capers all over the world, like helicoptering into Afghanistan to drop food, and so we just want to tell these sort of brave stories of impact and inspire people to do what they can with where they've been placed and what they have to bring to the table.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I like it. So stakeholders, you talk in the final chapter, I think it's the final chapter. It's close to the end anyway. You talk about stakeholders, and you do talk about Aflac, but you also, I think this quote that you did or grabbed from Mark Cuban, I'm pretty sure that's a really recent quote. Wasn't that during the pandemic where he said, I think what you do right now is going to have a lasting impact on every relationship you have going forward. And I'm pretty sure that was as we were entering the pandemic, he said that.
Right.
Because every employee, every customer, every stakeholder is going to recognize what you're doing right this moment.
Yeah, they're paying attention for sure.
Yeah. Was that, do you know if that was, I think it was, I didn't look it up, but I'm pretty sure it was a really
I don't
recent one.
exactly recall, but it sounds like it. And yeah, I think it's so true. I mean, I think we're in just a really unique season. I heard a speaker the other day, Albert Tate. He's a minister, and he was talking about that a lot of people have said that the last year was a test, and that what are the lessons that you're going to take from that test. And he said, what if you think about it the opposite way? What if last year was the lesson and going forward is the test?
That's awesome.
I know.
I like that.
Wow.
I like that a whole bunch.
Yeah. And so he was, telling a story about having just achieved 1 million miles on American Airlines, and he was so excited about that. And then the pandemic hit, and it just tanked, and just being frustrated at being at his kid's little football game, and he could be working, and so his son said something to him that he was like, it was so sweet, and he could have missed that moment, and he thought being on an airplane was the moment, but that was the moment, right?
Right.
And so how will we take what we learned and apply it going forward? That is the test. So how I would apply that to organizations is say, we've got to figure out how to make work not suck so bad.
Yeah.
Sometimes, right? And, we've learned a lot about what people want and need in the world of work. And people, the fact I was just on a conference call before this, and the guy's son came and sat on his lap during the conference call, and that's totally normal now, right?
Yep.
And like, I can see inside your home and your bookshelf, and you can be inside my home. So how can we take that same care about people as whole humans forward into the workplace? And also, I think one of the things that we have learned is that people will work endlessly if you don't sort of not let them do that. And so
yes, they will.
They will. And when you're on virtual all day, you will work endlessly. And so that was a lesson that we need to incorporate, I think, into the future. And so, this whole world of work conversation, you might say, what does that have to do with social impact? Everything.
Right.
Because it's about how we treat our people, how we see people as whole humans, how we support their passions and concerns beyond the work that they're doing for us, that we're not just producers, but we're human beings. And when you support people in that way, not only will they work better for you, but they want to be involved in helping your company make an impact beyond the four walls, or the virtual
Yeah,
four walls, right?
exactly.
Yeah, it's just something that's been on my mind, is like the, the test that we're about to enter is,
I love reframing that.
exactly like,
That
yeah,
is so great to reframe
that
it.
was
That
Albert Tate, just to credit him properly.
okay, awesome. Yeah, so the stakeholders too. I mean, a lot of people, again, another thing that Austin has plenty of are investors.
Mhm.
And you mentioned in the book how investors are looking now at not just, the bottom line profit, but they're looking at the social impact of companies, saying, what do you do for your community? What are you doing for your employees? What are you doing for, social awareness, or your community as a whole?
Right.
And I just thought that was so interesting too, because you look back at the eras, and that wasn't the case, certainly wasn't the case in the 80s to any great degree.
No,
But I can't imagine it was even the case, up until maybe the late 90s, if then.
if that. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so the CEO roundtable statement was certainly a big catalyst. That was the first time there was sort of a public statement from major corporate CEOs that it wasn't all about the shareholder, but the value to the stakeholder was equally, if not more important. And since that statement has been made, you've seen a lot of reverberating statements from, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, which is the largest institutional investor in the world, and then State Street, which is just about as large, saying not only are we looking at those kinds of metrics, but we will actually vote against, our having a position in your company if we don't see it. And so that was really putting money where their mouth is, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think that it's not just purely altruistic. There's certainly a component of that, and social investing is a whole space that's just blown up. And there's a lot of altruism there. There's a lot of faith-driven investing. But when it comes to these big institutional investors like BlackRock and State Street, they're looking at issues that can create risk in your business. And so not only might it be have an environmental impact or a social impact, or a governance impact, but it's also could cause risk for the business if those things are not addressed. So risk could come in the form of public perception, taking down your brand, or it could come in the form of, your call center doesn't have a wind shear roof on it, and so it can blow off, and then you have a loss of business for some time, and that's also an environmental issue at the same time. So that concept of materiality, what's material for your business, is really an interesting area to explore. Identifying, so like for most financial services companies, the environmental component of your social impact footprint, your impact footprint is not as important typically. But for a manufacturing company, the environmental implications of your work could be critical.
Yeah.
So what's appropriate for your business? And again, it's back to focusing. So if you're a small to mid-size company listening right now, I think one important point here is that you don't need to worry about everything.
Yeah.
Think about what makes sense for your business, not only what makes sense in terms of what positive things that you can do, but also in terms of risk mitigation and reducing the negative footprint of your business. Where do you have the biggest risk or the biggest impact, positive or negative? So
Yeah.
it's really brought about a whole new kind of way of thinking for businesses.
Well, and that leads right into the portion on impact pillars, I think is what you call them. So can you share what impact pillars are, and just kind of talk through kind of how you've touched on it a little bit, obviously,
Yeah.
but what they are and how you define them in the book, how you and Maggie define them.
Right. So impact pillars it goes back to what I've said several times around focus and going deeper, not broader. So rather than peanut butter spreading your dollars, resources, time, volunteerism across lots and lots of causes and opportunities, we're going to focus the majority of your efforts on 1, 2, or 3 things. And that just helps you to actually make a measurable impact. So we want to be able to actually quantify the impact that you're having, and you can't do that if you're doing everything. It allows you to tell a story in your brand, both internally and externally. Right? The story can't be, well, we just give to whoever asks. That's it. That's what we do. We give to whoever asks.
Right.
That's not a story. So it's, it's saying that, we're a construction company. We care about affordable housing. We care that veterans and elderly are not living in homes of disrepair. Those kinds of things that make sense for who you are as a company and start to generate a story that you can clearly communicate. And partner, and then that leads into selecting who your partners are. And with those partners, you want to see metrics. You want to see that whatever resources, whether it's time or money that you're putting into this partnership, is yielding something that's actually making a difference. You don't make any other investment without insisting on a return.
Right.
Right. So why would you for a social impact return?
Yeah.
Investment.
So we've covered a lot of ground. Are there areas of your book? Are there areas of what you do that you want to make sure we touch on, Hannah?
No, but it's something that I've been kind of playing with in the last couple of weeks is how do these same concepts apply to individuals and even families? And so I'll just mention that briefly because I'm kind of excited about this idea that the same way that we work with companies to help them create a more strategic, focused approach to the positive impact they want to make in the world, we believe that individual leaders can go through very similar steps to identify how you want to use your own talents and your own sphere of influence to make the change that you want to see in the world.
That's great.
Yeah, so it's been kind of fun to think about, and when it comes to families, families are made up of individuals who have individual talents and interests and spheres of influence, but then collectively, it's almost like an organization.
Yep.
Where your core ideology, your purpose, and your values are something that you can define together as a family, I believe. What's the higher purpose that you're aspiring to? What do you want people to see from the outside when they look at your family? And maybe what is the disconnect between what you want people to see and maybe what they actually are seeing?
Yep.
What do 100 years from now, what would you want people to say about your family? What are the values that guide your family's behavior? And whether you've ever identified those or not, you have values.
Yep.
Okay? And then what are everyone's individual superpowers and what are your collective superpowers? What, Jimmy might be really good at this and Sally might be really good at that, but as a family, you guys are great at X.
Yep.
Maybe it's being welcoming to guests or making people feel like they're part of something special, or whatever that might be for your superpowers as a family. And then who are your stakeholders? Who are your people? What spheres of influence do you have? Your school, your sports team, church, work, your extended family. Who are the people? Neighborhood. Who are the people that influence your family? Who are the people that your family influences? And then finally, those impact pillars. What do you care most about as a family? And where do you think that using your superpowers, you can make the most difference while bringing along some of those stakeholders on that same journey? So maybe you decide that as a family, you really have a heart for the homeless and you want to, make kits that you can hand out on street corners with socks and toothpaste and those kinds of things.
Right.
And, Jimmy can go to his school and put up a sign to collect donations for those kits. And Sally can go to her basketball team and do the same thing. And so you're all pulling in the same direction. You're pulling towards something bigger than yourselves.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big thing to be thinking about. That's that's a lot of fun. And that's a new thought for you. I mean, that's not something you've been thinking about for a long time. Did it
No,
come?
I woke up at 3 a.m. and
Right on.
yeah, just I got
Did you
up
wake
and
Cameron up? Like, get up.
I snuck out and I got up and started writing. And I thought, how can the blueprint be applicable for other groups? We've had a lot of nonprofit leaders tell us that the book and the blueprint process is really helpful for them as well, not only to understand how their corporate partners think and act, but also to organize the impact that they're making. I think it would be applicable for a lot of different type of audiences. So,
Yeah.
I think of just to leave our viewers with, just sort of one thought, one direction. It's just take a few minutes and, a piece of paper and just sketch some of this stuff out just for you as a person and, maybe in your organization or in your family, whatever you feel inspired to do. And think about, what's the legacy that you want to leave? What values are really important to you and to the way you operate? What are some of your talents and resources that you can offer? And who are your people?
Yeah.
Where are you uniquely placed? Where is your unique sphere of influence? And then finally, what do you really care about? And see if you can just kind of put all those in paper and maybe it'll spark something for you that you've never thought about before about how you can make a difference without spending a lot of money, without spending a lot of time, just getting a little bit more crystal clear about what that impact can be.
Yeah. That's a great exercise and it wouldn't take long.
No.
I don't think it would take long at all for most people to do that. Well, I want to touch on just real quick the fact that you mentioned in the book a few times and you just mentioned it now. Attract, engage, and retain talent are all part of this. This can help you do all of those things, but I think it can also help you hire. Like you may have a bad hire or a bad employee in your organization right now who doesn't subscribe to what you're doing socially as an organization, and that could be cancerous to your company. That could be a problem for especially if you're small. I would say at any size, but especially if you're small, if you've got somebody who's anti
Right.
the social impact that you're trying to make or poo-poos the ideas or whatever,
Yeah.
that's equally as bad.
Yeah, we take companies through a process that we call Spark, which is sort of sparking employee engagement. So once the leadership team has gotten together in a room and come up with the blueprint, we walk them through that process. We call the blueprint kind of the sandbox. Like the leadership team has said, this is the sandbox we're going to play in, right? But it's pretty undefined. It's fairly open. And then we take that sandbox to a group of employees, either the whole company or a selection of ambassador employees, maybe 50 at a time. And we say, okay, the leadership team has defined this sandbox. Now, what can you bring to this to help make this a reality? Because a strategy is only a strategy on a piece of paper.
Right.
There aren't people who are excited to make it so. So we do a kind of skills inventory and we find out what people like to do and how that could maybe help make this come to pass. And it could be skills that they use at work, but it could also be skills that they use outside of work. Maybe they love to work in a garden or to bake or to paint, those kinds of things. And they're maybe they love public speaking, maybe they hate public speaking. And so by doing that skills inventory, you not only create buy-in for this new sandbox, this blueprint, but you find out who your folks are to actually activate it and make it happen. Who are your leaders? Who doesn't want to lead, but they're happy to help promote or be on a committee. And typically those naysayers that you're talking about are they shift.
Yeah.
Because you're giving them
they get on board.
Yeah, you're giving them an opportunity. You know, people support what they help create, right? So you're giving them an opportunity to help create it. So, I mean, even without us there facilitating a Spark session, any company, once you've kind of defined your blueprint, you can then take the whole team if you're a small team, or a selection if you're a big team, and you can say, hey, this is what we're thinking. We want to test this with you. We want to tweak it. We need your input. How could you help us make this a reality? What things have we missed? What things should we tweak? And just the process of asking people, you'll be amazed their level of buy-in and engagement just from going through. And it can even be a 1 hour around the table, give everybody sandwiches kind of thing.
Right.
It doesn't have to be anything formal.
That's awesome.
So
I love it. Well, Hannah, thank you so much for being here. I haven't seen you in over 2 years, probably.
Yeah. I know.
So it's really good to see you and spend some time with you. And I just appreciate your insight and your expertise on all of this. And I'll post how to contact you, your website, how to get your book, and any other links that we may have talked about here. I'll post.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much for including me. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to talk about what I love. And I love the way that you're approaching, talent and hiring from a whole person mentality. And this, I think, thinking about social impact and getting people engaged in that inside your companies is just an additional lever to that whole person mentality.
For sure. Well, thank you again, Hannah. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.